Ever been watching TV with your family, and then all of a sudden there's that bleep. Someone said a bad word.
Yeah, those infamous bleeped out moments.
Exactly. And today's deep dive, well, we're going way back to the case that basically started it all.
Oh, this is a juicy one. We're talking about the world of comedy and censorship, and of course that list, those 7 words you still don't hear on broadcast TV.
Yep, the 7 dirty words. But, to be precise, we're actually going even further back, to 1973. Believe it or not, back then, those words were just as taboo on the radio.
And that's key to the whole story. It all starts with a comedian, George Carlin, and his routine, filthy words.
Which a New York radio station decided to play. In the middle of the afternoon, no less.
Can you imagine the reaction?
Oh, I bet the phones were ringing off the hook. Listeners complained, the FCC steps in, and boom, it's off to the Supreme Court.
And that's how we got FCC Pacifica Foundation. It's a landmark case, and not just because of Carlin's 7 words. This case raised a huge question.
A really big one. It's about the government's power, their right to control what we hear on the airwaves.
Exactly. Control over content, censorship. It's a debate that's still going strong today.
Absolutely. Okay, so before we get too deep into it, maybe a quick reminder for anyone who might need it. What exactly is the FCC?
Good point. The FCC is the Federal Communications Commission. They're basically the government body that makes sure all our communications, radio, TV, even things like satellite and cable, they're all playing by the rules.
Like the referees of the airwaves.
Exactly. And a core part of their job is making sure that the airwaves, which, by the way, are considered a public resource, are used responsibly. That's why they're the ones who give out licenses to broadcasters.
So there's this expectation that the programming, the stuff that goes out over those airwaves, needs to serve the public good.
Right.
Which brings us back to George Carlin and his, shall we say, colorful language.
He wasn't exactly known for holding back.
Not at all. Carlin deliberately used words that were completely off limits for broadcasting at the time. I mean, he even joked in his routine that these words could curve your spine and make hair grow on your hands. It's hilarious. And then he just launches into this whole bit using them.
And we're not talking about mild stuff here. He targeted those words considered the most taboo.
The untouchables.
Exactly. Shit, piss, fuck, cunt, cocksucker, motherfucker, and tits. Carlin repeated them, he played with them, used them in different ways. It was like he was testing the boundaries of language itself.
Pushing the limits, for sure.
It's crucial to remember, though, that this was a comedy routine. This was social commentary delivered to a live audience.
And judging by the recording, they were eating it up.
Oh, yeah, they thought it was hilarious. But here's the thing. Not everyone was laughing along, not even close.
Nope. In fact, one listener who happened to be driving with his young son when Carlin's routine came on the radio, well, let's just say he was not amused.
And this wasn't just a case of turning the station. This listener was so offended, he actually took the time to file a formal complaint with the FCC.
And that right there, that's where things get interesting.
Because this wasn't just a casual, hey, I didn't like that kind of complaint. The FCC actually responded by issuing a declaratory order against Pacifica Foundation, the station that dared to air the routine.
So they didn't shut the station down completely or anything that drastic, right?
No, not quite. Think of it more like an official warning. A slap on the wrist. But it was definitely a warning shot across the bow from the FCC. They were saying, this kind of language, not okay. You do it again and there will be serious consequences.
It's kind of wild when you think about it, right? Like one listener, one complaint about some bad words, and it causes this whole thing.
I know, right? Talk about a chain reaction.
But what was the FCC's reasoning here? Why come down so hard on the radio station?
Well, their main argument was that broadcasting radio and TV, it needs different rules than other types of expression. They were really focused on how accessible broadcasting is, especially to kids.
It just comes right into your home.
Exactly. And people, they expect a certain level of privacy and decorum in their own homes.
Right, like I can choose not to pick up a book, right, if I think it might offend me. But the radio...
You can't exactly control what you might hear.
Exactly, it's that whole pervasive presence argument.
It is. And the courts, they've historically given the government more leeway to regulate radio and TV for that very reason. It has the potential to just show up uninvited.
You just never know what you're going to get.
Exactly. And of course, the FCC was also very concerned about children, accidentally hearing this kind of language without any parental guidance.
Which, okay, I get it, I do. But couldn't you say the same thing about someone, like, cursing loudly on the street? you can't exactly control what you might overhear when you're out in public either.
That's a really good point. And believe it or not, those are the kinds of argument that were made before the Supreme Court.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah. Pacifica Foundation, the station owner, they didn't back down. They sued, claiming that the FCC's order, that whole slap on the wrist, well, they said it violated their First Amendment right to free speech.
So it's freedom of speech versus protecting the public, especially kids.
That's the heart of it.
What did the Supreme Court have to say about all this? I mean, did they side with the comedian or the FCC?
Well, in a 5-4 decision, the court actually ruled in favor of the FCC.
No way, really?
Yeah, they upheld the government's right to regulate indecent material on the airwaves. And this is where it gets a little technical, but the court, they made a distinction between obscenity, which is never okay, has zero First Amendment protection, and indecency.
Okay, so there's a difference.
A big one, legally speaking. Indecency is a broader category, you see.
So they were saying that Carlin's routine, it wasn't obscene, but because of when and how it was broadcast, it was still indecent.
You got it. It was indecent enough to give the FCC the power to step in. And to help understand this whole obscenity versus indecency thing, they used some pretty interesting analogies in the ruling.
Oh, yeah. Like what?
Well, there's that one about an unwanted phone call.
Oh, right. Like the damage is already done, even if you hang up.
Exactly. And Justice Stevens, who wrote the majority opinion, he famously said that having indecent broadcasting in the home, it's like a pig in the parlor instead of the barnyard.
A pig in the parlor? That's a good one.
Right. Basically, certain things are fine in some contexts, but they're not okay for the public airwaves, especially when kids are likely to be listening.
So after all that, the Supreme Court basically handed the FCC this tool, this power to regulate content.
They did. But, and this is important, it was a close decision. There were some strong dissenting opinions.
Meaning not everyone on the court agreed.
Right. Some justices, they argued that the FCC, they were worried it was basically imposing its own views on the entire country. And that context really matters, especially when we're talking about speech that some people might find offensive.
Because what might be offensive to one person is totally normal conversation in another community.
Exactly.
But sort of trying to censor something, even with good intentions, it can accidentally silence certain groups more than others.
100%. And in his dissent, Justice Brennan, he even pointed out that words that are considered really offensive by some people, they're totally normal within certain communities and cultures. He specifically mentioned how the Black vernacular often uses some of these words in ways that aren't meant to be offensive at all. It's fascinating to think about.
So it's like the court was saying, we trust you, FCC, to be responsible with this power.
Right. And to
Wow.
think about everyone when making decisions about content, Justice Powell, he even brought up an interesting concern, even though he agreed with the majority in this case.
What was that?
He was worried about, going too far. He didn't want the FCC to end up reducing the adult population to only hearing what is fit for children.
That's a great point. Where do we draw the line?
Exactly. It's a slippery slope, right? What's next if we start banning everything someone might find offensive?
And that's the crazy part. FCC v. Pacifica, it didn't just settle that one case. It's had a huge ripple effect, shaping how the FCC approaches content regulation even to this day.
Totally. It's amazing how much impact this one case has had.
Which is kind of mind-blowing when you think about how much the world of media has changed since 1978. Back then it was, a few TV channels, some radio stations. Now we've got cable, streaming, podcasts, everything.
It's a whole different world. The court's decision back then was based on this idea that broadcasting was uniquely invasive, that you couldn't control what you'd be exposed to. But now, we curate our entire media experience online. Don't like something? Block it. Done.
So does the Pacifica standard even hold up anymore? It feels kind of outdated.
You said it. It's a debate happening right now everywhere you look. Courtrooms, Congress, even in those big tech companies. Some say the old rules are totally irrelevant. Others say we still need some boundaries, especially for kids.
It's not just about bad language anymore either. The FCC, they look at violence, nudity, anything that might be considered inappropriate for broadcasting, especially when kids might be watching.
And all those rules are constantly being challenged and reinterpreted as technology changes. Think about those streaming services like Netflix, Hulu. So much of their content would never fly on regular TV.
And that brings up another huge question. How do you regulate something like YouTube, where anyone can upload anything? Where does the FCC's authority even begin and end with all this user-generated content?
Right. It's a whole new world, uncharted territory, and There are no easy answers. Those lines are blurry, Trying to take these old standards and apply them to these new forms of media. It's a tough one.
It's like we're always playing catch-up, trying to find that balance between free speech and protecting people, especially children, from content that could be harmful.
And that tension isn't going anywhere anytime soon. It's something we'll have to keep grappling with as tech continues to evolve.
It's definitely a conversation worth having. Well, that's about all the time we have for today's deep dive into the wild world of broadcast regulation. But before we go, we want to leave you with this. I imagine you're designing the system. You're in charge of how we regulate content today. What would you do? Stick with the ideas from Pacifica or completely start fresh? It's a tough one, for sure, but something to think about.
It really is, and it's a conversation we all need to be part of.
Absolutely. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into FCC v. Pacifica. Until next time.